and give a hand for George Hotz. I'm going to give a really quick introduction, but I don't know many people in this room who won't know of this guy. George is the first person to jailbreak the iPhone. He's got a history of taking a lot of multi-billion companies and making them run for their money. Sony, you got Cruise. I was working at Cruise at the time, and this guy running Comma was constantly coming up in discussions, and it's kind of hilarious. It's like he's really like a one-man army of an engineer fighting for open source, and now his latest popped out. Exactly. How do I get my TAM or my MRR? This guy's just like shipping really sick programs and other stuff and many layers of abstraction that we've talked about in detail. And that leads to what he's doing now, which is commoditizing the petaflop. I'll let George take it away to discuss this mission. Yeah, do you want the mic, George, or do you want to talk?
I have a mic. Is this on?
I think I'm still recording. You might want to.
Oh, okay. It's on the room.
Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is my second company. My first company is Comma AI. Comma AI still exists, and I'm definitely not a one-man army. We are companies. Comma is about 30 people now. Tinybox is 5. Comma's mission is to sell self-driving cars while delivering shippable intermediaries. Tinybox's mission is a little bit simpler. It's just 3 words: commoditize the petaflop. My investor was like, hey, commoditize. How are we going to have a moat? How are we going to capture value? I'm not worried about that. I am worried about NVIDIA's 91% margins on H100s. So commoditize. Okay, lines people are like, what libraries are you linking to? The only dependency right now in Tinybox is NumPy, and we're going to remove that. It has a torch-like front end, so you can go to docs.tinybox.org. We have docs now. It's a very cleaned up torch front end. It's all instant methods on Tensor, so you can do like x.conf2dw, which is pretty cool. And it supports NVIDIA and AMD without the CUDA or ROCm runtime. So when you call CU launch kernel, there's actually a ton of overhead that goes into CUDA runtime. We directly talk to the driver in the kernel. We use the ioptals to set up the GPUs, and then we speak directly to the queues that are on the GPUs to launch kernels. This is way faster and allows us to do caching and stuff that you can't really do for CUDA. Yeah. So, and it's pure Python, less than 8,000 lines. But aren't the drivers written in something else? No, it literally builds nothing. It's pure Python. Okay. So we also make a box, Tinybox. It's a petaflop for the home. You can get it with 6 700 XTX AMD cards or 6 4090s. It fits on quantized Llama 3 7B. It's quiet. It will not be louder than an average office computer. We have a grid of 9 140 millimeter outdoor fans on the front. It's $25,000 for the NVIDIA, $15,000 for the AMD. And it's shipping now. So we just shipped our first 2. We also released a NVIDIA driver mod to get peer-to-peer working on the NVIDIA GPU, so you don't have to go to the CPU RAM. Does anyone here install that? All right, go on that. So together, between Tinygrad and Tinybox, we're on MLPerf. Our system costs 10x less than every other entry on MLPerf. You see Tinybox red and Tinybox green. And we got residents trained in about 2 or 3 hours, depending on which one you buy. 6 accelerators, 1 cheap CPU. An order of magnitude cheaper, and very notably not an order of magnitude slower. We have no dependencies. So this is what a normal PyTorch sits on top of CUDNN, cuBLAS, CUDA deep learning kernels, runtime, compiler, and driver. The only thing we still use is the compiler. We do use the compiler, but we're chipping away at that slowly. The runtime is gone, obviously we use the driver. But there's no CUDNN, there's no cuBLAS. In fact, there's not even primitives for convolutions or matmults in Tinygrad at all. This is a conv2d being generated. This is the code. You can figure out why there's 2 loops. It's a mul and a sum, and then a bunch of indexing operations. So this is that same thing in graph. form. You load from 2 buffers. And then by setting up this top line is the shape, this bottom line is the stride. By carefully setting up shapes and strides, doing a multiply and doing a sum, you can express every conv2d in this language without needing anything explicit for a conv. There's so much less complexity in this. When you want to do a PyTorch port, you have to port thousands of kernels. They're working on PrimTorch to get that down to 250, but it's still tons and tons of complexity when you want to port to an accelerator with PyTorch. Tinygrad is just mul, sum, and other ones that look very similar to that. So this is what the conv2d looks like when it's lowered. So these are the indexing operations, and this is actually the math. You're like, wow, it's spending a ton more on indexing operations than math. Who knows what kernel coarsening is? All right, we got one. So kernel coarsening is when you compute multiple output values in a single kernel. How do you determine how to kernel coarsen? The answer is, remember your bit of lesson. Don't waste your time trying to tune these things. Just figure out how to put it in searchable space. So we have a beam search built into Tinygrad. You search for 4 different ways to optimize the kernel, and then you use the fastest one. So this is 28x faster if you're looking at the outputted gigaflops down here. Get started. Tinygrad runs almost everywhere. Metal, CUDA, HIP, AMD, NVIDIA. We use Tinygrad on the Comma 3 device to output OpenCL for the for Comma, and it's about 2x faster than Qualcomm's SNPE. docs.tinygrad.org. Our goal is to build chips, but first the software. If you want to build a chip, do not start building a chip. It's much more expensive to put things on hardware than it is to put them in software. So I'm not going to stand here and say we have some revolutionary new idea from the chip. We are going to basically build a GPU, but get rid of the cache and get rid of the work scheduler. Explicitly manage the DRAM SRAM with a tiny little processor, and then use big queues to avoid work scheduling because I don't use latency hopping. Everything is statically scheduled. We have like 2 years to build chips, but first, the framework. And that's where we're going to Well, who said we're building a GPU? Who said we're building a chip? If we don't have a work scheduler or a cache hierarchy, you really call it a GPU?
Good question. Anyone else have to comment? Come on, these guys, you're giving them like freebies here. Somebody get this fired.
Maybe just like a numbers question. What are the benchmarks on the 370B running on the Tinybox? Look at the side, but I wonder like what's the difference time such?
We're pushing it right now, so you'll get 20 tokens per second now, and that's totally unquantized. So the theoretical max is like 44, pushing the RAM bandwidth, and that's equal to 16, so you can quantize and double that. So eventually, it'll give us another 6 months to a year with the software, and you'll be running 88 tokens per second. Or let's say 80 tokens per second, UNT quantized to Tinybox 137. Right now it's 20. Actually, in master it's 10, but there's a PR that gets to 20.
Yes.
Great talk. I have a question. Maybe you can expand on the plans for your own chip. Like I think you tweeted about it a bit about open sourcing it potentially. Like maybe you can expand a bit about how you would do it today if you had like enough funding for doing it properly.
Well, not funding for doing it properly sounds like a bad deal, right? No, it's really a bad deal, right? When you take tons and tons of money from VCs, you've just killed your company. A lot of people don't realize this, but when you raise, it's kind of like, if you're, you take one oxy and everything's okay, right? It's nice, it's pleasant, right? And then, before you do it, you're banging 7 gram rocks, so which is exactly. So this is the problem. VC funding becomes very addictive. So if we raise $150 million to tape out a leading edge chip, we just killed the company. Okay, fine. 95% chance to kill the company, right? And VCs don't care about your risk. Remember, VCs and you have different incentives. So no, we're not going to do it like that. We're going to tape out a few small test chips, sell them to hobbyists, and then make the RTL open source and scalable, and get other people to spend the $150 million and tape out the chip. Some of you won't take my advice, and you can raise all that money and take my chip out and have a 95% chance of failing. But put the risk on somebody else.
Sure. Yeah. Cool. Step over here just so now do it straight.
So how do you see
petaflop at home competing with cloud providers? Maybe it's just different market, but it's scary.
So the AI alignment problem is a very real problem. But it's not a question of alignment between the company and AI. It's a question of alignment between the company and you. So it's going to be very, very important who your AI works for. Remember that if your AI is in the cloud, it doesn't work for you. It works for, you are not its master. But if you can kick it, it works for you. So we compete basically by, right? Like when Apple puts AI on the phone, what ads are they going to plow through? Right? AI is trivial ad block, but if they're getting their cut, they're going to let it through. Right? My AI takes no cuts and blocks all the ads, right? So I think that's long term the plan. I think long term you're going to want to own the compute because that's another way to ensure some life with you.
Just one more question. Would you do a rap battle for an interview instead of a pull request?
A rap battle for an interview instead of a pull request? Hell no. That's stale. See, the beautiful thing about a pull request is it's very cheap for me to evaluate versus somebody doing it, right? I mean, like interviewing is going to have to scale this way. Right? Like resumes do not work. Some companies do coding challenges. Coding challenges that can be automatically evaluated work as interviews because it's expensive for the candidate and cheap for the company. And that's what the future of AMD is.
Sorry, I misspoke. I meant if someone were to win the rap battle, they get the job.
No, irrelevant. Irrelevant. Your train set has to match your tests. If you're requiring
I'm very interested in your takes. Like obviously, transformers and language models are amazing at what they do, but they completely fall down at like very basic spatial reasoning tasks like a 7-year-old should do. I'm very curious on like your take of the future of AGI, spatial reasoning in general, and kind of where that's going.
It's not clear to me the transformers break that kind of stuff. I think that the training is where the problem is, not the architecture.
I do look at like the ArcAGI challenge.
Yeah,
anything that's solvable with transformers. Do you have any ideas of how you could do it right now?
Completely. I think it's completely solvable with transformers. I think that there's someone who already did it. I think there's a lot of like training where transformers can use things like self-criticism to train. It will never be solved through categorical cross entropy on fixed datasets. We need to move to training transformers in reinforcement learning, self-criticism, some like GAN style.
It's all about like program synthesis or hyperkernels or anything like that.
I don't think this is what Bray does. I think that again, transformers are completely fine. It just comes down to training that belches.
Last question. If you were going to do the ArcAGI challenge, how would you approach it? On time.
Reinforcement learning. Some sort of place where I can get synthetic data sets that's level 5.
That is actually a lot. But yeah, thank you.
Okay, cool. I was actually surprised to see that you have AMD work. I remember watching the live stream where you spent 5 hours complaining bitterly. Just wanted to ask your questions on, my question is, can you tell us about your experience getting driver level access to these accelerators and building software for them?
So AMD has a bunch of bugs. Again, like, you have some people, there's one hater on Twitter who's like, I used it to train an LLM and it worked. Okay, that's great. Like, AMD works on the happy. As long as you run exactly their example on the exact version, it works. The minute you deviate from that, there's bugs in the compiler, there's bugs in the runtime, there's bugs in the driver. There's actually bugs in the firmware too. So you can avoid most of these actually. So you can avoid a lot of the firmware. So we're speaking to the GPU using PM4 packets, not HSA packets. So there's this piece of firmware in the AMD GPUs called MEC. It's a micro engine compute. It's 250 kilobytes, and 90% of that code is for HSA. So if you speak to the GPU using PM4 packets, which is basically direct register sets, then you bypass all of this potential surface area for bugs. We also disable another source of bugs with CWSR, which is compute wave saver store. And the GPU basically has context switching, and just there are bugs, and it doesn't always restore from the context 1% of the time. So turn that off, speak to it with PM4 packets, and then the hardware works.
You're telling us you're the only company that has working software now.
Again, you can make stuff work on AMD, right? So for example, say you're using the scaled out product potential kernel, and that kernel fits the compiler. Okay, so let me just, I'll do the mask outside. Let me do the mask in the next step. Okay, now the bug's fixed, right? There's going to be hacks and workarounds all over the AMD stack. because they have terrible software development methodologies. They don't use fuzzers and they don't use CI. They say, what's the application and how do we get a single version of the driver to work for this application? This was their development process for video games. They're trying to keep it in AI. It will work for inference, it won't work for training. Again, how do you want to manage complexity? Do you want to put hacks all across your stack, or do you want to do one thing clean and directed?
Right.
I have two questions. I'll start with the first one. You're talking about the graph optimization. You have like a bunch of low-level ops. So I was wondering, it seems like memory bandwidth is kind of the main limitation when it comes to something like transformers. And I'm wondering if there's ever going to be the ability to optimize on that axis, because it seems like you have to do fairly non-obvious things to optimize the graph to get it to do both.
When you're talking about training or inference, so for inference, by the way, you're always going to be limited by, if you're doing batch size 1, you have to access every weight in the model, every thing you run. So you're never going to be able to optimize past that.
I mean, for something like
Flash attention. So there's a great paper, I believe it's called Merlin or Mirage, that introduces this abstraction called U-graphs. It's just like graphs all the way down, right? Like it's graphs that match your memory hierarchy. So this paper auto-discovers flash attention. There's an issue in Tinybox right now talking about rewriting the linearizer to basically do that. I think in a year, we're going to be auto-discovering flash attention. The TPU compiler can apparently do this. Google's TPU compiler, you just do enough optimizations, you eventually auto-discover things like flash attention and more getting relevant. So I think that's the future.
Yeah, but that is amazing. I didn't realize that was already the case. So you said there's a PR or an issue?
But there's an issue up for that. Like it's still going to take a while. And look, these things are the people doing Triton, the people doing PyTorch are very smart. These things are all going to start to probably come at similar times. But yeah, auto discovery of things, flash attention, and the whole class of things that look like flash attention. Yeah.
All right, that's awesome. When that happens, then that's really annoying. So that the other thing, I remember meeting Jeff. I don't remember his last name, but he's the CEO of TensorWave. And I remember talking to him shortly after you were complaining about the AMD drivers being really screwed up. Yep. And I was asking him about that. I was like, you're building a whole data center off this. How is that even remotely possible? And it seemed like there was this really large focus on AMD on enterprise. And it seems like, how do you align the incentives such that they give a shit about?
Again,
yeah.
It comes down to kind of what your scales are, right? The reason AMD is targeting enterprise is something that will take you one day to get working on NVIDIA will take you 1 month to get working on AMD, right? Now, for some people, this is okay. If you're about to buy a data center, your choice is spending $1 billion or spending $500 million, the extra engineering time may be okay for them. But they're never going to build a good stack because of this. And fundamentally, the fact that AMD is cheaper is just because they're willing to accept less of a margin, right? The minute it becomes competitive, NVIDIA is just going to cut their prices. So no, you have to focus on CI and fuzzing and proper software development processes at every layer of the stack. Or again, you'll carve out a niche, but AMD is destined to be second place, 10% of the market for the Democratize.
Yeah.
By the way, TensorWave and Hot Isle, look into their funding sources.
Yeah, just like as an FYI, I have a friend that works at AMD and she just complains about it's like firmware teams like all day, and I'm just like, oh, so it's not getting any better, is it?
The one guy tweeted me, he's like, I've been pushing to try to get a 7900 XTX in CI. They don't have a single one of their GPU they've shipped 1 million of in CI.
He told me he was teaching them how to use Git, and I was like,
you watch the top comment on Hacker News. I could rant about AMD forever, but until they fundamentally change their priorities, it's not going to get better. We just always have happening.
We have time for one more question, and then ready to close it off.
Cool. So how do you think about commoditizing inference versus training? Is there an interesting difference? And have you found that?
So the main difference between inference and training is inference is a lot simpler, and people are usually willing to put a lot more effort into hand-optimizing inference than they are training. Inference is a subset of training. This is why we're targeting training. Target the hard thing. Inference will be a race to the bottom. Training will be owned by much less companies. There'll be much less accelerators capable of training person.
Final question, should we shorten it again?
Oh, the market can remain irrational longer than you can open launch.
Cool. Thank you, George. Yeah, give a hand for George Hotz.
Yeah.